The sound of rain tapping gently against the windows was the only rhythm breaking the silence inside the late-night city bus. The streets of Los Angeles were nearly empty, lights blurring through the misty glass as the bus rolled through the avenues. A man wearing a gray hoodie sat quietly in the middle row, his face half hidden beneath the hood. No one knew that the man sitting there was David Beckham. He had chosen the bus that night on purpose. No chauffeur, no security, no attention. Just him, alone among ordinary people. He wanted silence, a break from the spotlight, a way to breathe like everyone else for a while. After spending the day visiting a youth center in Compton, where he played soccer with kids who had nothing but dreams, he needed a moment to think, to just be human again. But sometimes, even on a quiet night, the world doesn't let you rest. As the bus pulled away from a dimly lit stop, a young woman stepped aboard. She was in her late 20s, dressed in a blue office blouse, holding a small shoulder bag. She looked exhausted, probably coming back from a long shift. Beckham noticed her reflection in the window, tired eyes, distracted, staring at nothing. Two men entered right after her. They looked out of place, one tall, wearing a leather jacket with tattooed hands, the other shorter, wiry, with restless eyes darting around. Beckham caught that glance, the kind of look you only see from men who are searching for something easy to take. They sat near the back, exchanging quiet words. Beckham didn't like the energy. He'd seen faces like that before, in stadiums, in dark streets, in every corner of the world where fear and greed mixed together. He turned his gaze away, telling himself not to get involved. Not this time. But trouble always finds those who still care. The bus rocked gently as it made a turn. The woman stood, moving toward the door to prepare for her stop. Her shoulder bag swung slightly behind her. The shorter man shifted from his seat. Beckham's eyes narrowed. He knew that body language, the creeping, the subtle step forward, the hand pretending to adjust a jacket pocket. And then he saw it, the man's fingers sliding into the woman's bag. Smooth, practiced, almost invisible. She didn't notice. No one did. Except Beckham. His pulse kicked. "Hey!" Beckham's voice broke through the hum of the bus. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority, that commanding tone that once silenced entire stadiums. Heads turned. The thief froze, his hand half inside the woman's purse. The woman turned, confused, eyes wide. "What's going on?" she asked. Beckham stood up, pointing straight at the man. "He's taking your wallet," he said firmly. The bus went still. For a moment, even the engine noise seemed to fade. The thief blinked, then pulled his hand back, forcing a nervous laugh. "What? Man, you crazy? I didn't do nothing." The taller man, his accomplice, immediately stood, stepping in between Beckham and the thief. "Mind your own business, old man," he sneered, his voice low and threatening. Beckham didn't move. His hood fell back, revealing his face. The passengers gasped. Some recognized him instantly, others just stared, sensing something familiar in his calm but steely gaze. "I said," Beckham repeated, his voice unwavering. He took her wallet. The woman quickly checked her bag. The zipper was half open, her wallet halfway out. She clutched it to her chest, trembling. The bus driver shouted from the front, "Hey, what's happening back there?" The tall man took a step closer to Beckham, towering over him. "You better sit down, celebrity boy," he hissed, his breath smelling of cheap beer. "You don't know who you're talking to." Beckham didn't flinch. He'd faced the fiercest defenders in the world, endured boos from entire stadiums, but fear had no place here. "I know exactly who I'm talking to," he said coldly. "A coward." The air crackled. One of the passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "Is that really Beckham?" The tall man shoved him hard in the shoulder. Beckham staggered but didn't fall. "Don't touch me," he warned, his tone firm, his jaw tight. "Or what?" the man growled. Before Beckham could respond, the shorter thief tried to slip past toward the door. Beckham's reflexes, honed from decades of quick footwork, kicked in. He blocked the aisle, gripping the thief's wrist just as he tried to escape. The thief cursed, trying to jerk free, but Beckham's hold was iron strong. The tall accomplice lunged again, trying to grab Beckham from behind, but Beckham sidestepped, twisting his body in one smooth motion. The man stumbled forward, hitting his seat. The bus swerved slightly as the driver yelled, "Hey! Stop fighting back there." The woman shouted, "He really did it. He stole from me." The passengers erupted in chaos, voices overlapping, phones raised, recording the scene. Beckham stayed focused, keeping the smaller thief pinned until the bus pulled to a stop. The driver, shaking, hit the emergency button and radioed for the police. The taller man glared, rage burning in his eyes. "You don't know who you're messing with," he snarled, stepping forward again. Beckham met his stare without blinking. "I don't care who you are," he said quietly, "but I know what you are." Silence fell again. The tall man hesitated, uncertain now, the confidence drained from him. There was something about Beckham's calmness that disarmed him completely. Not aggression, just conviction. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed through the fogged windows. The police arrived quickly, storming the bus. The two men were restrained, shouting and cursing as they were dragged out. The woman broke down in tears, thanking Beckham over and over. He simply nodded, still catching his breath. One of the officers approached him. "Mr. Beckham? Is that really you?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah," he said softly. "Just heading home." The officer chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, you picked quite a ride tonight." As the situation calmed, Beckham sat back down, rubbing his wrist. The woman offered him a tissue for a small scrape near his knuckle. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't even notice." He gave her a reassuring look. "That's why we have to watch out for each other." The bus started moving again, the hum returning. People whispered his name, some in disbelief, others in admiration. But Beckham didn't bask in it. He looked out the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, thinking not about the fame or the cameras that would surely come, but about the simple truth of what had just happened. He'd acted on instinct, on conscience. Not because he was David Beckham, but because he was a man who couldn't stay silent while someone was wronged. Outside, the city lights blurred again, neon colors reflecting off wet streets. Inside, the bus was quiet once more, but this time the silence was different. It carried the echo of courage. And in that quiet, Beckham exhaled slowly, a small smile forming on his lips. "Still got some fight left," he murmured to himself as the bus disappeared into the night. The morning sun was slow to rise over Los Angeles, painting the city with pale gold. The rain had stopped, but puddles still mirrored the sky along the cracked sidewalks. Inside a small cafe near downtown, David Beckham sat by the window, sipping his black coffee in silence. The television behind the counter was tuned to a local news channel. He hadn't been watching it until he heard his own name. Breaking news. Former soccer star David Beckham reportedly stopped a robbery on a city bus late last night. The barista froze mid-step. A few customers turned toward the screen. Beckham let out a quiet sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. Someone had recorded it, of course they did. On the screen, blurry footage from a cell phone showed him standing in the middle of the bus aisle, pointing at the thief. The passengers' frightened faces, the chaos, the police arriving, it was all there. The clip already had over 500,000 views online. "Wow," the barista whispered. "That's crazy, he really took those guys down." Beckham just smiled faintly and stirred his coffee. "People exaggerate," he said softly. He wasn't looking for attention. He hadn't even planned to tell anyone. What happened last night wasn't about being a hero. It was about something deeper, the instinct to stand up when no one else would. But fame has a way of finding you even when you try to hide. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant, Grace. "David, the press wants a statement. TMZ, CNN, even BBC's calling. Do you want to comment?" He stared at the message for a moment, then turned the phone face down. He didn't need to say anything. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Cars honking, people rushing to work, vendors opening shop. But for Beckham, something had changed. He couldn't shake the image of those people on the bus. Their fear, their silence. No one had moved. They all saw what was happening, yet no one acted until he did. He wasn't angry at them. He understood. Fear paralyzes. It whispers in your ear that someone else will step up, that it's not your fight. But the truth is, courage doesn't wait for permission. He took one last sip of his coffee, left a tip on the table, and stepped out into the morning light. Later that day, he returned to the East Side Youth Center, the community field where he volunteered twice a week. Dozens of kids were already running around, kicking worn-out soccer balls, their laughter echoing across the cracked concrete. When Beckham appeared, the chaos briefly turned into cheers. "Coach David," a small boy yelled. "We saw you on TikTok." Beckham froze for a second, then laughed. "Oh no, you saw that?" "Yeah," another boy shouted, mimicking a karate move. "You were like Bam. And that bad guy was like whoa." The kids burst out laughing. Beckham shook his head, amused and embarrassed. "It wasn't like that," he said. "It wasn't a fight, it was just doing the right thing." A teenage girl with braids, one of the most talented players on the team, spoke quietly. "You weren't scared." Beckham looked at her for a long moment. Then he said honestly, "Of course I was." That silenced them. The laughter faded. The kids looked at him differently now, not just as a star but as a man who'd faced something real. I was scared, he continued, crouching down to their level. But I learned something. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about what you do while you're scared. He smiled. Now come on. Let's play. Hours passed. The sun sank lower, casting long orange shadows across the field. Beckham stayed until the last kid left, waving goodbye as the gates closed. When the final echoes of laughter faded, he sat alone on the bench, tying his shoelaces slowly, lost in thought. He didn't hear the footsteps until a voice spoke behind him. Didn't think I'd find you here, superstar. Beckham turned. A man stood at the edge of the field, wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled low. He didn't recognize him at first, until the man smiled, showing a chipped tooth. Beckham's stomach tightened. It was the tall accomplice from the bus. The man took a slow step forward. You cost me and my friend a good deal last night, he said, his tone calm but heavy with threat. We don't like people sticking their noses where they don't belong. Beckham didn't move. His heartbeat slowed, his body instinctively alert. The field was empty, the sky dimming fast. I don't want trouble, Beckham said evenly. You should be in jail. The man chuckled. Yeah, well, not for long. We got friends. The kind who don't forget. He took another step forward, now close enough for Beckham to smell the faint stench of alcohol and cigarettes. You think you can just embarrass us and walk away? Beckham rose from the bench, keeping his voice steady. You made your choices. I made mine. Now get off this field. The man grinned, but his eyes were dead cold. You're not as tough as you think, England boy. I'm not trying to be tough, Beckham said softly. Just right. For a long moment they stood there, the silence between them charged like static. Then, from a distance, a few locals appeared at the park gate. Parents, kids leaving from practice, an old janitor pushing a broom. The man hesitated. He spat to the side. This ain't over. Beckham didn't reply. He just watched him leave, his body tense until the figure disappeared into the fading light. That night, Beckham sat by his window at home, looking out at the quiet city. The lights shimmered like stars scattered across the earth. He thought about how quickly good intentions could turn into danger, and how courage sometimes came with a cost. He wasn't afraid for himself. What troubled him was the message behind the man's words. That people like him, people trying to do good, were becoming targets in a world that often rewarded silence more than honesty. His phone buzzed again. Grace had sent another message. CNN just called again. They want you live tomorrow morning. Beckham stared at the message for a while. Then he typed back. Tell them no comment. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes and whispered to himself, I didn't do it for the cameras. Outside, thunder rolled faintly over the city, a reminder that storms never really end, they just wait for the next spark. The next morning, Los Angeles woke up to a story that spread faster than the sunrise. Every news channel, every social media feed, every trending hashtag was filled with one name, David Beckham. The video from the bus wasn't just viral anymore, it was everywhere. Headlines screamed, David Beckham stops robbery on public bus. Beckham's act of courage wins hearts across America. From the pitch to public transport, Beckham proves class never fades. Clips replayed endlessly, dissected by talk show hosts, reporters, even influencers. Some slowed the footage to frame-by-frame analysis, calling it a masterclass in calm bravery. Others compared it to a Hollywood scene, except this one was real. Beckham sat on his couch, a cup of tea in hand, watching the coverage in quiet disbelief. He'd dealt with fame all his life, but this felt different. It wasn't about goals or trophies, endorsements or glamour. It was about something simpler, something human. His phone was a storm of messages. Teammates from Manchester, former coaches, journalists, even celebrities. Most were words of praise, but a few were more concerned. You could have gotten hurt, mate. Not smart, Becks. Those guys could have had weapons. Next time, just walk away. He put the phone down and stared at the screen again, his mind heavy. The irony wasn't lost on him. The world celebrated his courage, but all he could think about was fear. Because last night, when that man from the bus showed up at the field, Beckham had realized something. Bravery comes easy in the moment, but fear lingers after. Hours later, Grace, his assistant, showed up at his door holding a stack of letters and envelopes. You might want to see this, she said, dropping them on the kitchen table. What is it? Beckham asked. Mail. From everywhere. People sending thanks, letters, even small gifts. Beckham frowned, picking up the first envelope. It was written in messy handwriting. My daughter takes that bus every night. Thank you for standing up for people like her. The next one. I've always been too scared to speak up. Watching you made me realize silence helps the wrong side. And another. You reminded us what decency looks like. We needed that. Beckham read them one by one, the words sinking deep into him. 4 years, he'd used his fame to promote causes, children's hospitals, sports programs, charities, but never had he felt such a raw, personal connection with strangers. This is what it should be about, he murmured, half to himself. Grace smiled softly. It is, David. That's why people love you, because you're real. He chuckled under his breath. Real enough to get punched on a bus, you mean? They both laughed. For the first time in days, it felt lighter. But the story wasn't finished. That evening, as the sky turned orange over downtown LA, Beckham attended a youth event at the same community center. Reporters had swarmed the entrance, flashes exploding like lightning as he stepped out of the car. David, what made you do it? Were you scared? Do you think people should intervene like you did? Do you consider yourself a hero? Beckham stopped at the door, surrounded by microphones. For a moment, the crowd noise faded in his mind, replaced by the memory of the bus. The fear in people's eyes, the shaking hands, the woman clutching her bag. He raised his voice just enough for the cameras to hear. I'm not a hero, he said firmly. I'm just a man who couldn't stay quiet. We live in a world where too many people see something wrong and choose to look away. I just did what anyone should do. One reporter shouted, but most people are afraid. What would you tell them? Beckham looked straight into the lens. His eyes were calm but carried weight. I was afraid too, he said. Courage isn't about not feeling fear, it's about standing up despite it. A hush fell over the reporters. Cameras kept flashing, but no one spoke for a moment. Then Beckham added softly, if one person watches that video and decides to help someone next time, then it was worth it. He nodded politely and walked inside, leaving the press speechless. Inside the gym, dozens of kids erupted into cheers as he entered. The walls were covered with hand-painted signs, "Thank you, Coach David, you're our hero," and one banner in crayon letters that read, "Be kind, be brave." Beckham laughed, slightly embarrassed, waving to them. The kids ran up, hugging him, talking all at once. One boy handed him a folded drawing. It showed Beckham on the bus, standing tall against the thieves. Is that me? Beckham asked, grinning. The boy nodded. Yeah, you stopped the bad guys. Beckham crouched down, meeting the boy's eyes. You know what's more important than stopping bad guys? The boy thought for a second, then shrugged. Helping good people, Beckham said, smiling. Later that night, when the event was over, Beckham walked alone through the empty gym. The lights were dim, the sound of bouncing balls faint in the distance. He stopped near the mural on the wall, painted by the kids. It showed people of all backgrounds playing soccer together under the words, "We all belong." He smiled to himself. The door opened behind him. Grace entered, holding her phone. You might want to see this, she said. He took it. On the screen was a message, not a public one, but a direct video from the woman on the bus. Her voice trembled slightly. Mr. Beckham, I just wanted to thank you. That night I was too shocked to say much. But you didn't just save my wallet. You reminded me that there are still people who care. I told my daughter what you did. She said, Mom, that's what a real man looks like. Beckham watched the message in silence. Then he smiled softly, eyes glistening. Tell her, he whispered, that real courage belongs to those who keep believing in good people. When he stepped outside, the city was calm again. Lights twinkling, cars rushing past, life returning to its rhythm. But something had shifted, not just for him, but for everyone who'd seen what happened. In a world often drowned by apathy, one act of decency had become a spark of hope. Beckham put on his hoodie again, blending into the crowd as he walked toward the bus stop. The same bus line pulled up, different driver, different faces, but the same spirit. He got on, nodded politely, and sat near the window. Outside, Los Angeles moved on. But inside that bus, for one brief, beautiful moment, there was a quiet sense that maybe, just maybe, people could still be brave together. Beckham leaned his head against the glass, watching the light streak by. And somewhere in the hum of the city, his quiet thought echoed. Courage spreads when kindness leads. The sun was setting behind the skyline of Los Angeles, streaking the clouds in orange and violet. David Beckham walked along the boardwalk near Santa Monica, hands in his pockets, his mind far from the noise of the world. It had been 3 days since the video went viral, and life around him had become a whirlwind. Interviews, requests, invitations, brand campaigns trying to ride the wave of his newfound hero moment. But Beckham didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. Not from the media, not from the praise. but from realizing how fragile courage was in a world addicted to spectacle. People were talking about bravery, yes, but they were talking about his bravery, not theirs. They were applauding from a distance instead of asking themselves, would I have done the same? That thought followed him like a shadow. He stopped at the railing, staring at the waves crashing softly against the pier. The salt air was sharp, cold, and grounding. A little boy nearby was trying to juggle a soccer ball, failing miserably but laughing every time it rolled away. Beckham smiled, instinctively walking over. Here, he said, picking up the ball and balancing it effortlessly on his foot. The boy's eyes widened. Whoa, you're David Beckham. Beckham winked. You sure? Maybe I just look like him. The boy laughed. No way you are. I saw you on TV. My dad said you were brave. Your dad's too kind, Beckham said, kneeling down. You like soccer? The boy nodded eagerly. I love it, but my friends say I'm too small to be good. Beckham smiled softly, placing the ball in the boy's hands. You know what? When I was your age, people told me I was too small too. They were right, I was small. But I worked hard and I believed. That's what makes the difference. Not size, heart. The boy's father, standing nearby, called out, Thanks, Mr. Beckham. For everything, not just for this. Beckham gave a polite nod and walked on. But as he moved, he couldn't shake the man's words. For everything. That evening, Beckham arrived at the East Side Community Center. The local news had announced he'd be visiting, and a crowd had already gathered, journalists, families, and dozens of kids. But this time, Beckham didn't come to play soccer. He came to speak. As he stepped into the small gym, the noise faded into an expectant hush. The crowd parted for him like a tide. Someone handed him a microphone, and for a moment he just looked at all the faces, young, old, curious, hopeful. He took a slow breath and began. You know, I've been called a lot of things in my life. Player, captain, celebrity, businessman, even hero lately. He smiled faintly, shaking his head. But I'm none of those right now. I'm just David, a man who sat on a bus and saw something wrong. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beckham's tone wasn't grand or rehearsed, it was honest. I didn't act because I wanted to be brave, he continued. I acted because I couldn't look away. And maybe that's the point. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just refusing to be silent. He paused, scanning the room, seeing eyes glisten, kids leaning forward, people hanging on to every word. I grew up believing that sports, like life, is about standing for something. Fair play, respect, dignity. Somewhere along the way, I think the world forgot that a little. We see wrong things every day, online, in our streets, sometimes even in our homes, and we tell ourselves it's not our business. His voice deepened, carrying emotion. But silence is a choice, and it's a dangerous one. The room fell into stillness. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above. He went on softly, the truth is I was scared that night. My heart was pounding. But if I'd stayed seated, I'd never be able to look myself in the mirror again. I didn't stop those men because I'm strong. I stopped them because I had to. A small girl raised her hand timidly. Mr. Beckham, were you really scared? Beckham smiled warmly. Yes, love. Every brave person is scared. But bravery is what you do after the fear shows up. Her father squeezed her shoulder proudly. Around them, people nodded, understanding sinking deep into their bones. Beckham took a step closer to the crowd, lowering the microphone. You don't have to be famous or rich or strong to make a difference. Sometimes all the world needs is one voice that says, enough. The audience broke into applause, not loud but heartfelt, the kind that feels like a shared heartbeat. After the event, as the crowd dispersed, Beckham stayed behind, walking the length of the empty gym. The floor glistened under the dim lights. He could still hear faint echoes of cheers, laughter, hope. Grace approached quietly. That was powerful, she said. You know, the mayor wants to give you an award next week. Beckham smiled and shook his head. I don't need an award. If people remember the message, that's enough. Grace tilted her head. And what message is that? Beckham looked at her with the calm certainty of a man who's found peace in simplicity. That courage belongs to everyone, not just the people who make headlines. He turned off the lights, leaving the gym in soft darkness. Later that night, Beckham took the same bus route home. The driver recognized him immediately and grinned. Back for round 2, huh? Beckham laughed. Hopefully quieter this time. He found a seat near the middle, the same spot as before. The bus was full of strangers again, workers, students, dreamers, life moving on. As they rode through the glowing city streets, Beckham noticed a woman near the front clutching her purse tightly, cautious, aware. Across from her, a man stood up to offer his seat to an elderly passenger. Small acts of kindness, simple gestures. Beckham smiled to himself. Maybe the world wasn't as broken as people thought. Maybe it just needed reminders, moments that reignite the courage buried inside ordinary hearts. He looked out the window as the lights of Los Angeles blurred past, his reflection blending with the city, humble, quiet, human. Somewhere in the distance, someone might still remember that night, the man in the gray hoodie who stood up when no one else did. But Beckham didn't think of himself that way. He wasn't the hero of that story. Everyone who decided to care, who chose to speak up, who found strength in that act, they were. As the bus slowed at his stop, Beckham stood, adjusted his hoodie, and whispered to himself, "A single act of courage can wake an entire city." He stepped off the bus and disappeared into the glow of the streetlights, the hum of the engine fading behind him, leaving nothing but the quiet echo of courage lingering in the night.